This is John Drabinski, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, graduate students, and everyone in between, cultural workers and political organizers, in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. Today's conversation is with Alix Chapman, who teaches in the Department of African American Studies at Emory University. His research and teaching interests include Black queer studies, Black feminism, and anthropology, and he is the author of Raising the Bottom, Bounce Music and Black Queer Performance in Post-Katrina New Orleans from 2026. In this conversation, we discuss the relationship between activism and intellectual life, sexuality and Blackness, and the place of ethnographic methods in Black studies. Good morning, Alix. How are you today?
I'm great, John. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Outside of this one little fact, I am a human being on the other side of the podcast, but got an email from Teaching and Learning Center today that said fall semester is almost here. And so outside of wanting that entire organization fired on the spot, I'm doing great. Middle of the summer heat wave is over, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. We're sort of building a nice representation of Black studies there at Emory, and really happy to have you as part of that. So welcome to the podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the invitation.
And I should add as well, excited to have you as an anthropologist. We have a sort of small, but I think growing cohort on the podcast of people who work with anthropological methods in Black studies. I think this is a really important contribution to the field of Black studies. So that as well, happy to have your perspective. And, we'll have a chance to talk about your research, hear about how you think about the field of Black studies and how your research and Black studies fit, and how you innovate the field and these kinds of questions. But I wanted to start first really with the more personal question, which is what drew you to Black studies? What drew you to the study of Black life, and what keeps you sustained and connected to this kind of work?
Thank you, Finn. Appreciate that question. I think that for me, Black studies, I had a very uneven path that really began in as I'm sure a lot of your other guests have talked about, a lot of familial experiences. And also just being, growing up very far from the South. I grew up in Washington State, a town called Yakima, Washington. That's where my father is from. And I grew up in a very multiracial, multi-ethnic, multinational family. All my first cousins are mixed and half British. Been growing up in the Northwest in the 60s and the 70s. And our community was only probably around 5% Black. I grew up around in a very kind of redlined working class white family on one side, working class Mexican family on the other side. And I was the only Black kid in all of the schools I went to till I was probably in the 5th or 6th grade, and not until I left Washington. So I never had a Black teacher till I got to college. So those experiences of always kind of growing up, feeling and questioning, why are we here? My great-grandparents arrived in that area through the Great Migration in the 40s. And I think they just had this attitude, like, we want to get as far away from the South as possible. Like, we were almost up in Canada. And my experience is also very colored by my mother's side of the family, which is from a town called Muskogee, Oklahoma, where I also grew up, which also has a lot of very particular, I would say, ethnic differences as very kind of indigenous Black folks in that region. So, I remember by accident when I was a kid, my mom, who's very devout Christian woman, she bought me the Song of Solomon, thinking it was a biblical text.
Seriously,
By Toni Morrison.
I love that. That's a great movie moment.
I was probably 10 or 11, and she got me this book for Christmas, and I didn't really grow up knowing Black folk outside of family and the church. beside what I received through like music and media. And when I read my first bit of Toni Morrison, I was like, "What the hell? like,
Mhm.
like, what is going on here?" And I was just like so fascinated. And I think that I also just had this inherent particular interest in the lives of Black women. Um, I was really young when I became aware of a lot of the trauma in my family. My maternal grandmother was killed in a murder-suicide just a year or 2 before I was born. She was the mother of 8. She still had 5 children at home, and in an act of domestic violence, her partner killed her, and as she's screaming for her children to run from the house. This was in Oklahoma. And as I grew up and kind of at an early age, I really recognized the trauma of that incident and how it affected everyone, and how that trickled down to the children that never even got to know their grandmother. And so I always had these questions from a really early age about violence and about blackness and about gender, and that's just one instance of a lot of the trauma in that part of my family. So I think that when I can remember being in the theater seeing The Color Purple as like a 5-year-old. No, I think I was 7 when Color Purple came out. But I was just very interested in what I heard through music in Black women's experiences and what I heard and what I read about. My grandmother on my dad's side is from Hope, Arkansas, where Maya Angelou is from. And when Clinton became president and I saw Maya Angelou for the first time, I got really interested in her. I can remember even being like at football practice as a kid and being on the sidelines reading The Heart of a Woman and just being fascinated with her travels, her curiosity about life. So that really informed a lot of my early thinking. When I did get to college, which was I didn't really have like a strong guidance. I went to a community college right down the street from my high school in Yakima. Then eventually I ended up at Washington State University, Wazoo, over there by Idaho. And my dad is a musician, so I initially thought that I was going to be a musician myself. I played music from an early age, played piano. Um, I sometimes would play with my dad in restaurants, like background music for me. But I was more of a classically trained, where my dad is a very kind of funk, blues, jazz player of guitar and bass. And so when I got to college, I thought that's what I was going to do. But I was very interested in politics also. But at the same time, not really being able to find a space that could house my interests. There was no
Mhm.
Black student union. The Black, particularly Black American population there was just very, very small. And so I oftentimes felt like coalition was inherently necessary to to be in the company and ask questions and to think through things. And that led me to the Women's Center on that campus, where I was mentored by this amazing woman named Alice Coyle, who a Chinese feminist activist, intellectual who really took me under her wing. And I started working at the Women's Center, helping organize a kind of like way before, I mean, we had any inkling of Uber or anything. We would organize rides where people could call in, and we would organize rides in the late 90s to get people across campus safely at night and things like that, and things like Take Back the Night. And but yeah, most of my close friends at that point were young feminists. A lot of people who were first and second generation immigrants from Southeast Asia, a lot of Eritrean and Ethiopian kids. So my experiences were always very informed by these kind of global connections and learning about movements and things that were happening elsewhere. I was part of the FOSA, the Filipino Student Association. Also, they had the best outings and lots of great food. And I have a lot more memories of those experiences than I do a lot of my early studies. I became kind of disillusioned with the idea of majoring in music because I've always had this little bit of a ongoing power struggle or debate with my dad, and I just like I'm never gonna be as good as my dad is, so
Hmm.
why do I even bother?
Funny.
And so I kept up with music, and I met this great another mentor named Horace Alexander Young, who was a saxophonist, former manager of Regina Bell and ex-husband. And he also took me under his wing, and I started like playing in blues ensembles and in a jazz ensemble. So most of my time in undergrad was spent like playing music and organizing. Um, but in my actual formal studies, I ended up studying majoring in psychology, trying to figure myself out, I'm sure. And and I had a very interesting evening experience with psychology where I was studying with a scholar named Fran McSweeney, who was the last student of B.F. Skinner. So I got like a taste of
Really?
like
That's
behaviorism.
okay. I did not see that coming. B.F. Skinner. This is amazing.
Yeah, I worked closely with her, but I was very disillusioned with psychology, and I think that it took me a long time to kind of figure out why. And it wasn't until my last year where I had a capstone in anthropology that I started to learn more about instead of kind of like our experience and worldview stemming from internal psychoanalytical states and various things. I started learning more about systems and processes and social construction, deconstruction, and then everything started to click.
Mm.
And that also started to make sense for me of like the political interests that I had and how subjectivities are produced through global historical contexts, as well as various social formations. And it was my studies, but I can't remember this professor's name, but I had this anthropologist who was doing research in where was it? In Samoa. And I've always thought it was interesting. Like, I mean, just for my family, I've always been very interested in my family's genealogies and just people's self understandings. And so I feel like I always had a little bit of an inherent social scientist in me. But she was talking about during her graduate research marrying someone that she met in the field who came back to the States with her. And then after many, many years of being together, her husband came out and told her that he can't do this anymore, that he was raised as a third gender in Samoa, and that he had been exposed to Western media and was trying to conform to a certain type of gender binary, but he realized, like, this is not me, and I'm going back home. I still love you, but and I was just so fascinated with this personal
Mm,
narrative,
mm.
and yeah, that really just sat with me. But before I knew it, college was over, and it was, and really when I got out of college, I knew I did not wanna go back to Yakima, and I can literally remember the day in a van with all of my filled with all of my things, approaching the exit to my get back to my hometown, and I saw the exit, and I just suddenly I was like, "Oh, hell no. I'm not going back home." And I just went to Seattle. I just kept driving, and I ended up in Seattle. And, growing up in Washington, most of the my dad's generation, like, had a kinda negative, perspective of Seattle. Most people immediately would pick up and move to LA, and a lot of people from up there through the Great Migration had family in California, if not LA, the Bay Area. and then they would end up in Washington State. And so there was this connection to California where people generally went. So my family, I think, thought it was a little odd that I ended up in Seattle, but when I got there, it was my first time, and also through all this process, I'm trying to figure out my sexuality, and it was my first time in a gay village, Capitol Hill in Seattle, and I was really just having to spend a year or two just trying to figure out who I was, and I had some very interesting experiences in the art scene there that was very robust. Like Seattle's, so I mean, people know about '90s grunge and all of that, but Seattle just also had this very um, vivid street art and performance art scene. And I just kind of through partying started to meet various activists who had been involved in the WTO in 1999, and quite a few of these people actually had some relationships to Oklahoma, where I also grew up. And before I knew it, in 2002, I met this group called the Infernal Noise Brigade, that was a tactical unit performance art troupe that emerged through that was formed to as a strategic direct action group in the WTO, and I was suddenly just thrust into like a group of 30 very radical, multinational, multi-ethnic activists who really like to party, but also really took performance art and culture along with direct action very seriously. 2 weeks after I met them, I ended up at Burning Man, which I had never heard of. And I was, like, performing at Burning Man, and then before I knew it, I was going to global summits like WTO and G8 and also RNC, summits and demonstrating, and that became the focus of most of my 20s. Um, it was really characterized by the kind of political work that we were doing and, by just, like, throwing really amazing, parties all the time, but also just, like, my daily life became about, like, collectivities. I lived in among a network of, collective housing in the area. I lived in a squat for years in downtown Seattle. I was a dumpster diving, like, street punk kid, for a long time, and it was beautiful. It was just, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of Left Bank Books. It's a anarchist bookstore in downtown Seattle near the Pike Place Market.
I still have so many books. I went to Seattle University, so I still have left bank books, and I always write my name and the date I bought the book in the internal page. And I wrote where I bought the books. I have all these ones that say left bank books, like semiotext and like
Oh,
Marx Lenin Reader. Anyway, sorry, this is a huge
cool,
nostalgia
cool.
moment for me. I love left bank books.
Yeah, I love it too, and it's still there, I believe, but, the
Only in
people that
Seattle does that stuff
founded
survive. I love it.
yeah, the people that founded Left Bank in the '70s, also, there was a house that most of the activists lived in called King Street, and I ended up living in that place, um, in the mid-2000s.
Hmm.
And so, which still contained a lot of a great library there where all the, like, extra books would end up. So there's nobody really is still associated with the bookstore, but that was like, our house was like a community center, and there were just all these various activists who were always in and out of that space. And, I mean, I lived with, like, Palestinian and, Jewish activists that wrote zines, together about, alternatives to occupation. I lived with, just, like, this just amazing mixture of people, and so even, outside of so I really my intellectual growth was formed through a lot of lived experiences. And I mean, I started probably right out of undergrad re-educating myself because since I was really struggling to find the type of mentorship or even having even a clue about what Black studies was. The first book that kind of led me on the path, which was like I probably fetishized by many a white liberal. It was Soul on Ice.
Mm-hmm.
I remember someone telling me to read Soul on Ice, and so I'm kind of learning about the Panthers, but also like, what the hell is wrong with this man? Uh,
It's a
with
wild
Eldridge
connection.
Cleaver, what is going on? But through that book, I heard about James Baldwin for the first time. I heard about Angela Davis for the first time. Then through them, I learned about Audre Lorde for the first time, and so this was for the most part happening to me, um, just me alone, with a lot of time because the great thing about um, I only would take work that would allow me to continue to do the artistic and activist things I wanted to. So I was an art model. I was a part-time social worker at a network of shelters for homeless kids. I was a commercial fisherman in Alaska. And this was kind of normal for a lot of the people that I hung out with. And we would always help each other in finding just like really piecemeal work. But I had a lot of time to spend to myself reading, and I spent a lot of time in the public library. And also because of the in the marching band in the Infernal Noise Brigade, I became a vocalist for the group, and a lot of our music and songs were protest songs from around the world. And so I would study a lot of that, but I remember I started to take like Audre Lorde poems and I would translate them into French. Usually we tried to not perform or I would not sing in English most of the time. And so yeah, it was just very vibrant and very unusual pathway into these things. I felt like I started to learn about racial capitalism not through Cedric Robinson directly, but through my experience of going to, you know, visit and stay with Zapatistas, or I'm at a summit in Scotland or in Mexico, and I'm meeting South Africans face to face and talking about how economic structures are entrenching these colonial legacies. And that really made me realize that my family's experiences and the trauma that I had witnessed growing up was not their fault, but also like the fact that we are living within neocolonialism still. That like I would I would joke to my mom or like talk about like jumping like my desire to jump trains and travel all over the country. And just like your grandparents were sharecroppers, that we wanted better for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
so I my family was very concerned about me. Because I had apparently just went off the deep end, and there was not a little bit of psychedelics and things involved in some of these experiences, but I think that it made them also somewhat secure to know that I there was a level of intentionality and purpose with what I was doing.
Mhm.
Yeah, like I mean, even when I remember I was arrested at the Republican National Convention in 2004 in New York, and I had to go to the tombs in New York, and but it's like I was in a cell with like 80 people and my some of my best friends, and that made me feel in everything that I did as well as with what I was reading, I felt like I was very much within a Black radical tradition.
Mm,
If
mhm.
I was still within predominantly white spaces, I felt like my position within all of it was very, it made sense to me, and that's all that mattered. And there were definitely a lot of conflicts. I think that there was a lot of times where I felt like my identity as a Black person and as a queer person had to be subsumed within supposedly universalist points of connection around like class and whatnot. But I think that my path to graduate school was partly a desire to grow in that way and to find like a block in which I could experience in and among other Black folks and study further. But it also was a result of Bush era crackdowns. Just in some ways, I felt like I was very tied to a shift in the way that protest was treated. Uh, that it shifted from regular policing to a far more militarized attack. I had a friend that went away for terrorism based on kind of environmental uh, protest. And it just started to really realize, I started to realize also I just like didn't have healthcare. I was just like
Yeah.
eating garlic and praying, put some whiskey on it for years.
That's real, man. I many
Uh,
years without health insurance as well. This like cannot be overstated. The
yeah, and I
way
couldn't
that
figure out any
changes.
other way. So that really was one of the strongest reasons that I decided to, and also I just wanted to get away from where I had grown up in Washington and spread my wings more. I met so many amazing people in that time that inspired me. Like at one point, I went and lived. I went to Cuba by myself when I was 23. Um, didn't know anybody there. I I knew I couldn't use, like, any type of US based, um, like, money so I was just like I just took $700 in my pocket, and I got on a plane to Cancun and went to Cuba by myself.
Wow. Okay. I love
To
that.
experience the revolution and socialism, and on the plane, I met some people who were part of a international kind of study group, and some of them were Americans, and they were just like, "You can't just do that. You can't just, like, show up in Cuba alone and not know where you're going." I had dreads back then, my clothes were a bit dirty, and I had just been traveling in Mexico by myself for a while, and I was like, "I'm just gonna." I had this ethic in me that, like, life is gonna work out. If I believe things are gonna be okay, they will. And, I remember the plane was like an old Russian plane, and we landed, and I was they were proved right. I was so scared when I got there. I was like, "This is not what I thought it was." And, I ended up spending a month there studying folkloric dance. I actually met, a lot of really great activists who later on ended up in Austin, where I was, going to grad school. I saw Fidel Castro.
Hey.
I literally was like, I saw Fidel Castro in person.
I have to ask, did you meet Asada Shakur when you were there?
I did not.
This is one of my like moments, history encounter, whatever you want to call it, moments is being
Hmm.
in Havana and meeting Asada Shakur. So
I did not. I kind of would hear about I knew she was there, and but I didn't know how to go about it. I didn't have the connections at the point. If
I was there with Witness for Peace, and so at the Martin Luther King Center in Marianao,
Mm,
and she like regularly came and talked to people visiting. So yeah.
that's amazing. Yeah, I really wish.
So why anthropology at University of Texas Austin? So because what I'm struck by is this sort of travel, sort of international, and also really so much of the bookishness of your encounter with study of Black life, with Black studies, talking about
Mhm.
Eldridge Cleaver, but also Song of Solomon, which by the way is one of the great stories on this
Mhm.
podcast. If you're thinking this is a religious text. Um, so it is totally interesting that it's anthropology and also University of Texas Austin. I mean, I know you said that you wanted to to go somewhere different than the Northwest and be somewhere different. But what was it particularly about anthropology in Austin that drew you there?
It was so it was really so, like, by chance, like, I knew, coming out of undergrad, as I said, that I was really interested in anthropology, but I hadn't really read a whole lot of anthro. But I knew, as I was trying to figure out where to go, and at UT Austin, it really was only that I had family in Oklahoma. It was 5 hours away from my mother. It was a completely different kind of environment. Austin, I hadn't been to Austin, but I felt like it still had some connections, like, activist-wise to the Northwest.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, like, literally, there was I feel like my first day in Austin, used to be it wasn't a squat, but it was like a collective called the Rhizome Collective. And there's another one called Entropy that were kind of like the communities I first, like, started engaging when I arrived there. So, no, I mean, I applied and I was denied the first time, and, then, Jafari Allen, who was there at the time, reached out to me and was like, "Yeah, we turned you down this first time, but we are interested in you, but you seem to be a little rough around the edges." And so, he took me, I mean, even way before we met in person, when I'm still in Seattle, he started doing readings with me, and helping me prepare to apply the next time.
Amazing.
And, I mean, I never hear about things like this, like someone taking that level of interest, and I was interested in doing work in going back to Cuba, where he was doing work, but I think what he was particularly interested in was that I had already kind of began studying and was interested in Black queer studies and definitely had a long-term interest in Black feminism. So when I went, I didn't really have a particular, project together, which was very frustrating in the first few years, but I had a lot of zeal and a lot of passion in and around these particular paradigms. So the fact that it ended up being in anthropology was in somewhat happenstance, but when I arrived there, it was just incredible because I just realized, like, I landed in just the right place, and I didn't even apply anywhere else. Like, it was the one
Okay, I
program,
love that.
the one school that I applied to, and I get in, and then I ended up my cohort was this just incredible, just everyone were activists, and all of us were just, like, young activists coming out of a lot of various movements, and, some people had more of a background already within anthro, but not necessarily all of us. There were a lot of Brazilians, there were a lot of Caribbean folk. I actually feel like I was one of the few, like, Black folk from the States
Mm.
there. And then my teachers are activists and intellectuals like Joao Vargas, and Ted Gordon, so it's anthropology, but what was taking place, what has been called the Austin School, and the Austin School was a Black Studies, African diaspora studies project that was housed within this
Mhm.
anthropology department.
Yeah.
But this project was far more multidisciplinary, multi-methodological, and this is exactly what I needed, coming from what I'd experienced in Seattle. Like, it was allowing me to not have to suppress or, my identity, and also kind of really paying honor and tribute to kind of the coalitional type of things that were occurring previously, but were not being articulated in the ways that I needed. And so, yeah, I arrived there and it's just amazing. Like, scholars like, Courtney Desiree Morris and Damien Sojourner, and also people outside of anthropology, definitely with my interest in performance, Joni Jones, Omiolomo, became one of my teachers, and who else was there at the time? But it was just like it wasn't even just specific to the campus and to the university. There was just like a lot of artists in
Hmm.
Austin at the
Yeah.
time. As I said, this group, a lot of Cuban migrants ended up in that area at the time, including Las Crudas, the Black feminist rap group from Havana. And so it was really great that I was able to still have a a lot of comfort and foundation and community coalition and organizing, while at the same time being able to go to grad school and refining my interest in the things that I had known while kind of growing in new ways.
Yeah, so I'm really interested because you've in some ways walked right up in into the door of this next question, because I'm interested in how obviously the background, but also this particularity of Austin that I think is really, really important. So this also part of why I was really excited to have you on the podcast is to hear you talk about it. How that has shaped how you understand or how you imagine the field of Black studies, because of course, Black studies has this tension at its origin, which was uh, partly a demand by students in the late 1960s and early 1970s that there be a place to study the Black intellectual tradition, art, history, sociology, and so forth. On
Mhm.
campuses and disciplines hadn't done that. Black studies would be and has been that place where the Black intellectual tradition is studied, cultivated, and expanded. And we inherit that today in a commitment in the field, right, as part of the orientation of the field towards the intellectual tradition, towards intellectual life of ideas. But of course, in late 1960s and early 1970s is that moment where the radicalization of Black liberation struggle had really contested those boundaries between a campus and a community, between books and mobilization, between ideas and political prescription. And so I think we inherit that also in the field of Black studies, in a commitment to a certain kind of liberatory politics. And so what's
Mm.
interesting to me about the Austin program, but also your narration of your arrival there, is, how it's fitted to your experience, both in terms of the bookishness of your encounter with Black studies and the uh, direct action work of your everyday politics and organizational politics. So I'm interested then, this is a long way of asking you really, what is that portrait of Black studies that works for you, that orients you as a scholar?
Hmm. Um, Thank you for that. I mean, I have to really say I was really learning in the doing through all of these various phases. I didn't know a lot about the origins of Black studies and student protest, but I was experiencing it all the time.
Mhm.
So even I can recall in my when I was at UT, uh, yeah, general most anthropology, social core classes have like you kind of going through the classics and the canon, and as with a lot of traditional disciplines, you're a lot of dead white men, and a group of students was just they decided to rewrite the curriculum for the class or come up with their own, and they presented it to the department. They caused it a lot of conflict. We were constantly organizing and bringing in community members and talking about the gentrification within the community, the the ways the university was implicated in it. Being that it was in Texas, lots and lots of ongoing debate and struggles over migration and borderlands. The department was split between the African diaspora track, the borderlands track, and like a folklore and public culture track. And I was kind of situated within the diaspora and folklore public cultures, but all of us were and this was also kind of this formation was is what led to the inauguration of the African, the Black Studies department at UT.
Mm.
It kind of started to take shape through this Austin school, the ethos of it, but also the ways that we were starting to push back from within the university. So that is how I started to kind of come to realize this history. But I also, I when I was writing my dissertation, I got a fellowship at UC Santa Barbara. I was supposed to go work with Clyde Woods, and unfortunately, he passed away literally like the month before I got there to start working with him. Um, and that even was building to my knowledge of the history, that department in particular was where students, um, had a sit-in and took over a building and, started to demand for Black studies. And at the time, Cedric Robinson was still there, George Lipsitz was there, so I was kind of just learning a lot of these things from these people, in real time. Yeah.
So I'm interested, you talked about your PhD work being in anthropology, but a very distinctive kind of anthropology and approach, as well as, and it's really interesting to hear you talk about the way the it wasn't just the Austin school or sort of Austin program's approach to the practice of anthropology, but also a moment of contesting the core curricula. I love that. That's just I mean, I'm sure it was extremely painful and fraught and difficult, but as a story, it's fantastic because it really places you at this crossroads moment. But you know, your PhD is in a very particular kind of anthropology, but in anthropology, which is a disciplinary
Mhm,
field. But now you're working in a Black Studies department, and I'm interested to hear you reflect a little bit on how that relationship between having been trained in a discipline and now working in a non-discipline or an anti-discipline or a
mhm,
multi-discipline, or maybe for some people a completely different kind of discipline. Like, how has that
mm,
movement between disciplinary training and non-disciplinary workplace shaped both how you understand and execute a research project, but also how you
mhm.
conceive and practice a classroom?
Okay. Um, well, I think core to my training in anthropology was, it really highlighted and we talked a lot about, like, positionality. Like, what is the positionality? There we are not working from any type of sense of, like, assumed objectivity. What are, the and what are the stakes and, like, how can we be accountable to the ways that we're engaging in study and in communities? That was always very important. And, like, my first preliminary research project was in Trinidad, and I was working with, the late, Colin Robinson, who was a queer activist who founded a group called Caribbean Pride, but also had, um, helped and started a lot of various organizations in New York, like Audre Lorde Project and various things. And, being anthropology, you're not really doing the work to a lot of people unless you're going abroad somewhere
Mhm, mhm,
and you're using that particular type of lens and gaze, and so I kind of felt compelled toward that in the beginning, but I could not, um, say that, like, my heart was in it in a particular way. I went for many years very lost around, like, what really is important for me to do, and, New Orleans in a way, saved me, but I don't wanna get too off track. I don't know, there was a kind of some core tenets, and I think that a lot of people, as we all know, anthropology has a horrible past, and it's, in being a tool of colonialization and the ways in which it participated in this kinda categorization of, like, the human and the great chain of being and all those things. But I think that at least within anthro, there is such a inherent, obvious kind of engaging with its problematic, origins
mhm.
that that becomes central to in questions around, like, how you do of academic inquiry that I don't know that all disciplines engage in. And that program was very focused on activist anthropology, and there was a very particular idea about what activism was. It was
Mm.
very focused on sending students into government, into various institutions, and destabilizing and shaking things up as they are kind of looking at various power structures. Uh, I was I had a really difficult time in some ways trying to define what I was doing. Not a lot of people were doing cultural studies. I was the only person studying music. Nobody was looking at sexualities. And I think that there was a bit of this I think that there was a little bit of a suspectness around, like, what is culture? How is culture contributing to activism and resistance? And, given what I had come from already, I had a very particular strong sense of this for myself.
Mhm.
And so I was really trying to figure out how to delineate that and how to find that. And in a way, it felt like my research in New Orleans found me more than I it. Um, all of those things just kind of suddenly like coalesced and could be realized in the project that I ended up doing.
Mhm.
I think that as I've really had a long postgraduate shifting, winding trajectory. I mean, I was an adjunct in gender and sexuality studies at Tulane. Then I was a visitor at Spelman in the women's studies department. Then that turned into a tenure track. I would like to think I think I am bl- the only black man that's probably taught women's studies at a HBCU. And then my appointment was also in Black queer studies there. uh, uh, Teaching Black queer studies, and so all of those things really influenced and I was just still learning so much, even though I didn't have a particular background in women's studies, feminism, but then I'm teaching like 101 women's studies like on a regular basis. I was really learning, and that eventually led to my position at Emory in Black studies. Um, which I wouldn't call an anti-discipline, or at least our version of it. I think that um, are in our we are very much trying to build a interdisciplinary, multimodal vision of what Black studies is.
Mhm.
And, I particularly am always really trying to like, we have, like, a lot of really great historians, and I I feel like my training at UT combined lots of stuff. I was learning media analysis. I was learning performance ethnography in the theater department in particular. Like I feel like I learned more about methodology actually in performance and theater.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I really try to encourage students to be experimental. I feel like me myself, I feel like I'm a kind of a scavenger in terms of theory, and but I have to say I don't see myself as much as an anthropologist as much as I find myself really committed to ethnography.
Mm. Mhm.
I don't really care what you call it. Where are the people at?
Yeah, interesting.
Where are the people at? Where are the voices of the people? And what is the context of the dialogue?
Mhm.
That's really important to me. And I am always pushing for that with students. Um, and I think that's really influenced by a lot of my early influence of Black feminism. Just the personal is political. I love Barbara Christian's A Race for Theory. I have to make sure every student has read that well. Like that there are Black people in everyday life. There are people, working class folks that are not just data points, but they are producing knowledge.
Mhm.
And how are you going to show that? What is your commitment to that? So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, you use a word that I love, and so that's why I'm sort of seizing on it, but also because I think it perfectly encapsulated so much of what you've been talking about, which is the sense of curiosity, right? And that the Black Studies curiosity moment is a really distinctive thing, and
Mhm.
when we make that a priority in the classroom, but
Mhm.
also our own research, I think we are in a Black studies space in a really kind of unique way. And I love this take on ethnography. People have talked about ethnographic methods on the podcast in similar ways, but I really love the way you put it there. So I have
Thank
just
you.
two more questions for you. The both sort of big picture speculative questions. Thinking about the history of Black studies and the history of the study of Black life, I'm interested to hear you say a bit about what you think the field has done well and what it has not done so well.
Hmm. I mean, I think that Black studies being an outgrowth of the Black Power movement is really significant and important in maintaining a critique of racism that, if not for that, would just kind of completely go disavowed. Um, I think that for me, Black Studies is really important in this kind of two-part need to be involved in kind of deconstructing and make. I feel like in my teaching, I have to spend a lot of time, no matter what the actual topic of the class is. I think students keep coming back because I always am making sure that they understand that this is not just about representation.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about some type of add and stir into the mix, but
Exactly.
like we also need to be thinking about power, uh, and not just thinking about like all the names in which we name ourselves, but like what is our proximity to power
Mm-hmm.
always. And what is also necessary, it's not just, I think that sometimes students get very overburdened with, as they become more aware of the horrors and the grief and the pain, trying to always reassure them of the beauty and the pleasure and the joy of re-envisioning a different world. Not just re-envisioning, how do you make that world happen in the now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that particularly in my experience of direct action, that is something that is, I always try to kind of bring into my, at least the ways that I impart Black studies,
Mm-hmm.
that I think that the project of abolition is also very much about i- uh, imagination and curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Again, um, I keep coming back to that word throughout all of this, but when I was an undergrad at Wazoo, I had this really, at working in the Women's Center there, we hosted Octavia Butler once, and I got to sit and spend a day with Octavia Butler. I didn't know who she was.
I had a
No
couple
clue. I was like,
things. I had a couple things like that as an undergrad, like having lunch at a table was with Jean Bertrand Aristide, and I was like, 5 years later, I'm like, wait, what?
wow. Yeah, I had no clue who. I don't think almost nobody came to see her. And I just kind of felt bad. So we were just kind of hanging out the whole day. And for the most part, what we talked about was I just have always loved science fiction and fantasy. And we mostly talked about that all day long, of course, her being who she is. And she actually told me that she was going through a writing block at the time. And I think this is before she was like really, really like blew up and was getting a lot of attention as she deserves. But I think I've just had a lot of great experiences and seeing the other ways that people envision different worlds.
Mhm.
And that is, I think, what is important to a lot of the work I do, just like how people's self-understandings and how can we show that capital and white supremacy and heteropatriarchy and all these various things have not foreclosed the possibilities, and that there are always these breaks and these like fugitive actions that are happening. And I often start off my classes by telling my students that uh, like, I'm a storyteller, there's gonna be a lot of tangents, there's gonna be a lot of, talking about my past, talking about various things that might seem disconnected, but there is a point. And there is and I think that they really enjoy seeing the ways that, the various possibilities of what they can do, and that it doesn't have to form some type of linear notion of development and progress.
Mhm.
And that even when you think that you're failing, might actually be the crack and fissure to the light.
Mhm. I love that. So I have a last question for you. I mean, I think in some ways you've spoken to this in multiple kinds of registers and multiple kinds of angles. But last question, what is, in a Black Studies context, what is the issue you would want us to all be thinking about, or the question you would want us to all be asking?
I think at this moment, given how blatant and guileless the attacks are, I mean, again, coming from UT Austin and looking at what that administration is doing and trying to get rid. I mean, they are well on their way to trying to get rid of the department that I felt like I was partly involved in. Its formation. We have to figure out how to care for each other. How do we have inclusive, radically coalitional ethics while also staying dangerous,
Mm.
and not getting too comfortable and refusing. Um, I was listening to my colleague, Dr. Bettina Judd's interview, and the ways that she talked about like there are points of capture, but there are still points of radical refusal. And I'm afraid that we might preemptively seed ground in a kind of protectionist to protect ourselves. And I always have to remind myself, like, I got into this. It is felt throughout my own trajectory that like we are embattled, like from the beginning, and the assault. You can never turn your gaze too far from it,
Hmm.
um, career or not. I think that a lot of my life I was running from spaces where I did not feel safe and not sure what I was running toward. I was running away sometimes, or looking for places of support and coalition to engage in a fight. And some of that can get a little you can get distracted from that in just trying to survive and get stability, have a home, those things. But to remember um, that there are all different ways of participating in the struggle, but it is a struggle and it is a fight, and we there is a again, there is a attempt at foreclosing, and make like we can't assume or take for granted what we have gained
Hmm.
in Black studies, and that it is we have to keep fighting for it. Yeah.
I love that. Great place to wrap up. And Alix, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time, obviously, but really your thoughtfulness and your generosity in this conversation. It's a really fantastic contribution to the series, and I really appreciate you.
Thank you, John. It's been lovely. I appreciate the invitation.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye-bye.